Welcome to all participants to this Info Day session on the operating grants. My name is Leo Meyer. I am acting head of one of the two units in CINEA that implement the LIFE program. CINEA, as you will, most of you will be aware, is the executive agency that has been mandated by the European Commission to implement a number of spending programs related to climate, infrastructure and environment. And this, of course, includes the LIFE program. We have two different teams in the agency dealing with the program. In our team, we focus on the environment sub-programs. And in our sister unit, colleagues focus on the climate and energy sub-program. And Mathilde Louvet is here to represent the second LIFE unit. And we are also joined today by colleagues from our finance team, represented by Anne Vermaelen. One of the things we do in CINEA to implement the program is a certain number of services to beneficiaries, of course, but also to potential applicants. And that's what the Info Days are really all about. Now, the publication of the call, which is at the height of today's session, it was delayed for reasons that are internal to the EU institutions. And that is why we are having this separate session now a little bit later than the rest of the Info Days. You can see on the screen an overview of the agenda for today. It's quite straightforward, I would say. We start with an overview of the calls themselves, followed by a question and answer session. And then we move on to the financial aspects that are relevant to know for, especially if you win a grant, but also, of course, need to be kept in mind already when applying, and then a separate Q&A session also for that. So in the process of these 2 hours, we are really going to address all the practical aspects of the application procedure and of giving a bit of an advanced perspective on grant management. This presentation will include some of the more recent changes that have been made to how this part of the program is run. Many of you will be aware that the program as a whole, but especially the operating grants, are under quite a bit of political scrutiny at the moment. And this is reflected in some of how we operate at the moment. But we are not obviously in this session going to delve into the political questions that are in the background. They are discussed in other contexts. So with this, I believe we can quickly show the next slide, which has a reminder on where to find the calls themselves. We trust that this is well known by now. And you can directly then show the next slide, which has the Slido code. Slido is the tool that we use for collecting questions. Can you show the next slide, please? It's there at the bottom. Okay. Yeah, so that you can already scan to get ready then for the following presentations. And as I mentioned, we will have separate questions and answer sessions at 2 different points after each of the 2 presentations. And with this, I hand over the floor to, I believe it's Joël, who will open the presentation of the call itself. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Leo. And if we could have the next presentation on show. Yes, so good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. My name is Joëlle Noir-Felice, and I'm a Program Coordination Manager at CINEA, and together with my colleagues Eva Paparati and Anne Vermalen, we are pleased to present today's session on the LIFE program Operating Ground Calls for Proposal, and we do hope that it will help clarify the opportunities that are available and support the development of strong applications. Just as a side note, the QR code is available to you now, but the Slido isn't yet open. It will open a bit before the question and answer sessions. So don't get frustrated if you scan the QR code right now, but it doesn't allow you yet to ask your questions. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today is quite comprehensive. We will begin by providing you with some general background information on the funding opportunities that are being presented, including the legal framework underpinning these calls. We will then give you an overview of the open calls for both the framework partnership agreements covering financial year 2027 and 2028, as well as the specific grant agreement calls for proposals for the financial year 2027. And following this introduction, we will take a closer look at each of the two calls, focusing on their specific requirements, evaluation criteria, and their respective application form. As we said, a first questions and answer session will then take place via Slido. And after that, our colleague Anne Vermalen will present the financial aspects of the operating grant. And a second question and answer session is scheduled following her presentation. But without further ado, let us begin. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we will briefly recall the legal basis for these two funding opportunities. Funding for non-governmental organizations that contribute to the development, implementation, and the enforcement of EU environmental and climate legislation and policies is actually explicitly provided for under the LIFE regulation. And this support is awarded in the form of operating grants, which are intended to contribute to the day-to-day operating and running costs of eligible organizations. The use of framework partnership agreement, which we commonly refer to as FPAs, as the mechanism for awarding this grant is set out in the LIFE multi-annual work program, and the introduction of such SPAs under both the current and previous multi-annual work programs was intended to provide NGOs with greater stability and predictability in terms of funding over time. In practical terms, an FPA can really be seen as an umbrella agreement for recurrent grants. It does not in itself include a dedicated budget, but it is a necessary precondition for obtaining annual operating grants through specific grant agreements. Next slide, please. In line with the priorities of the LIFE program, operating grant beneficiaries are active in its core intervention areas, which include the environment, covering nature and biodiversity, as well as circular economy and quality of life, climate action, which focuses on both climate mitigation and climate adaptation, and clean energy transition, which covers renewable energy and energy efficiency, including the energy efficiencies of buildings. Next slide, please. So what kind of organization do we finance? Eligible organizations for operating grants under the LIFE program are independent, non-governmental organizations that therefore have a clear focus on the environment, climate, or clean energy transition fields. These organizations must be established in an EU member state or in a country associated to the LIFE program. And in addition to that, they're expected to have a genuine European dimension to their work, meaning that they should be active at EU level and have a structure and activities covering at least 3 EU member states. This is really to ensure that supported organizations are not only thematically aligned with the LIFE priorities, but they're also capable of contributing to EU-wide policy development and implementation. But don't worry too much because we will come back to the specific eligibility criteria in more details at a later stage in the presentation. Next slide, please. So organizations that are funded typically deploy a twofold approach in their work, and they combine support for EU policy development with support for policy implementation. On the policy development side, they act as intermediaries between civil society and the EU level decision making. They channel views and expertise from the field. They will alert policymakers to emerging environmental, climate, or energy related issues, and they will contribute to the knowledge building and evidence based policymaking. They also actively participate in public consultation and expert group, helping to inform EU policy from an early stage. On the policy implementation side, their role is equally important. They will contribute to enhancing policy acceptance and public understanding, support awareness raising and citizen engagement, and help with the practical implementation and monitoring of EU legislation, including in its transposition at national level. They may also play a role in identifying and reporting potential breaches in the implementation of EU environmental law and climate and energy transition. Taken together, these two dimensions really illustrate how LIFE EU funded organization through a LIFE operating grant help bridge the gap between the EU policy making and its implementation on the ground. Next slide, please. But let me now briefly outline the key deadlines for both of the calls. So the call for proposal, both calls for proposals were published as indicated by Matthias Leonard. And the deadline for the Framework Partnership Agreement application is the 8th of September at 5 p.m. And this agreement will establish two-year partnership covering financial year 2027 and 2028. The deadline for the specific grant agreement application is slightly later, and it will take place on the 22nd of September at 5 p.m. And they concern one-year grant for the financial year 2027. It's really important to stress that organizations wishing to be considered for an operating grant in financial year 2027 must apply to both calls, and that only organizations that have been selected for a framework partnership agreement will have their specific grant agreement proposals evaluated. Application must be submitted online via the EU funding tenders portal, and simultaneously, applicant must also be registered in the participant register and hold the 9-digit participant identification code. Next slide, please. So the indicative budget announced in this call amounts to 14.5 million per year, and it's really expected to translate into the funding of approximately 30 to 35 NGOs. As under previous calls, the EU co-financing rate is set at a maximum of 70% of eligible costs, meaning that organizations are required to secure the remaining share from other sources. And in addition to this maximum ceiling of 70%, there is a maximum EU contribution of 700,000 euros per grant per year, which defines the upper ceiling of support per beneficiary. For current beneficiary, it's possible to request an increased level of funding compared to what they currently receive, provided that the request remains within the overall limits of 70% co-financing and the 700,000 ceiling. Finally, a simplified cost option is applied for personal costs using a 50% flat rate approach, which is used to calculate the total eligible costs in a more streamlined way. I will now give the floor to my colleague Eva, who will take you through an overview of the process.
Yes, thank you very much, Joël, for presenting the two calls. Now I will go through the evaluation process. Thank you for the slides. As you can see, both calls have different steps in the evaluation process, and we will go through them. the assessment steps for both calls, meaning that each proposal in each call will go through these different steps that we will see more in detail in the following slides. The steps are, first of all, we will check the admissibility of the proposal, then the eligibility of applicant organizations. Then we will check the operational and the financial capacity of applicants. We will also check proposals against the exclusion criteria, which I will explain in a little bit, in a little while. And then, most important, I would say, the evaluation of the proposals against the award criteria, which actually assess the quality of the proposals. And I would also mention that the evaluation is endorsed and approved by an evaluation committee, which is composed by CINEA staff as well as European Commission staff from the three Directorates General, which are DG Environment, DG Climate Action, and DG Energy. Next slide, please. So let's go through the different evaluation steps more in detail. First of all, each proposal must be admissible, which means that, of course, it must be submitted on time. So it's important not to miss the deadlines of each call that Joël mentioned earlier. Now, talking about this, I would like to advise applicants that you can always prepare and submit a proposal ahead of time to make sure that your proposal is submitted, and you can always modify it later until the deadline, so to make sure that you don't miss deadlines. Then you should make sure that you use the correct application forms that can be found in the electronic submission system of the Funding and Tenders portal. It's also another admissibility criterion that proposals must be complete and include both application forms and compulsory annexes, and that they must respect the formatting rules. This might sound like a very formal requirement, but in fact it's important because if you change, for example, the font or the size of the text, then you might have more characters per page, and this would be unfair towards our other applicants. So we must ensure that all applications are fairly treated, and therefore, if you change the format or size of the text, the proposal might even be discarded. So please make sure that you keep the formatting of the forms that you will use. Next slide, please. So next criterion that is the next step, let's say, is eligibility. This was mentioned also earlier by my colleague Joël. Applicants must be non-profit legal entities, which are independent from government, from public authorities, from political parties, and from commercial interests. Here, I would like to mention that to assess independence of the applicants, we will check in particular the funding sources, and the composition of the applicant's membership and of the governance structure of the applicant organizations. Then the other following criterion, they must be primarily active in areas of environment and or climate action, including clean energy transition, with an environmental or climate objective. And here, to assess this criterion, we will in particular look at the organization statutes, but we can also look at other information sources. Then the applicants must be aiming at the public good, sustainable development, or support implementation and enforcement of EU environmental and or climate policy and legislation, including clean energy transition. and they must be active at EU level with a structure and activities covering at least 3 EU member states or countries associated to the LIFE program. I would like to mention that this step is only assessed at FPA stage, not for the SGA call. So this is the eligibility of the applicant organization. Next slide, please. Thanks. Then other steps are the operational capacity and the financial capacity of the organization. So for the operational capacity, we check that the competencies and qualification of the key staff, which are described in the participant information form, which is one of the mandatory forms that must be submitted, are sufficient to implement the work program that is proposed. And then actually later during the grant agreement preparation stage, we will also check the financial capacity of applicants based on audited accounts and annual statements. In fact, applicants must demonstrate that they have stable and sufficient resources to successfully implement and co-fund their work program. Then another step is called exclusion. This is checked in case, well, we check if the applicant is in a situation of bankruptcy, fraud, corruption, and in this case, of course, the applicants would be excluded from the call. Next slide, please. Oh no, sorry. Can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, I forgot to mention for the exclusion criteria, we check this during the grant agreement preparation, and we use the early detection and exclusion system, which is a Commission database. I would also like to mention that to assess the operational and financial capacity of applicants, we may want to ask for additional explanations or documentations from the applicant. So you must be ready to provide us with this additional information or documentation in case it is needed for the assessment. Then I think this for now is my last slide, and I would pass the floor back to my colleague Joël Marfalis to present the evaluation of the award phase, and we will start with the award evaluation of the Framework Partnership Agreement call for proposals. Thank you, Joël.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, so as Eva indicated, we will now take a deep dive into the Framework Partnership Agreement call for proposal. So as previously explained, the Framework Partnership Agreement is really to be perceived as an umbrella multi-annual Framework Partnership Agreement that doesn't have a budget attached to it, but which is a compulsory requirement in order to be able to pretend to a specific grant agreement that covers a 1 year a single financial year, and that comes with a budget attached to it. So it is very important for potential applicants to understand how framework partnership agreements are articulated vis-a-vis specific grant agreements, because you need to have a framework partnership agreement in order to be able to secure a specific grant agreements, hence the necessity to apply to both calls that are running in parallel in 2026. We will start by looking at the evaluation criteria for the award of the Framework Partnership Agreement. And why do we look at these evaluation criteria? It's really because they are the lens through which proposals are read and assessed, and they should therefore guide the structure and the writing of an application from the outset. And it's with that lens in mind that we will then move on to look at the Framework Partnership Agreement application itself. Next slide, please. So the evaluation of the Framework Partnership Agreement proposal is structured around 5 main criteria, and each of these criteria is scored out of 20, but they have different weighing applied to reflect their relative importance. So criteria 1, 2, and 3 are weighted at 1, while criteria 1, which looks at the sensor function, is weighted at 0.25, and criteria 5, which focuses on organizational development, carries a weighing of 0.75. There is no threshold per criteria, but to pass, a proposal must achieve an overall minimum score of 45 points out of a total of 80 points. Passing doesn't necessarily mean being funded, unfortunately, because due to limited funding availability, we can only finance the best scoring proposal. So a proposal could achieve a passing score, but not be recommended for funding. In case of execo proposals, which can happen, precedence is given to proposals that have been submitted by an organization that has not benefited from a live operating grant under the previous call for framework partnership agreement that covered the period the financial year 25 and 26. If there is still execo, then the proposal focusing on a theme that is not otherwise covered by a higher ranked proposal will be given precedence. And thereafter, precedent is given on the basis of estimated value for money. So a very thorough methodology in case of execo proposals. Next slide, please. Award criteria 1 assesses how well the proposals aligns with the core objectives of the LIFE program. It will look at the extent to which the proposed work program contributes to one or several of the specific life objectives, ensuring that the work program are clearly anchored in the life program priorities. It will also examine how closely the proposal is aligned with the relevant EU policies covered by the call. And finally, it assesses the extent, the degree to which the proposal delivers clear EU added value, meaning that the impact goes beyond national or local level and contributes meaningfully at a European scale. Next slide, please. Award criteria 2 looks at the support to EU policy development and examine several key dimensions of the applicant's proposal in this area. It first looks at the extent to which the proposal demonstrates a strong and in-depth understanding of EU policies in the fields of concern. It then considers how the applicant contributes to strengthening the knowledge and evidence base, thereby supporting more robust and effective EU policy making in these areas. It also assesses the applicant's role in promoting policy integration and coherence across sectors, ensuring that environmental, climate, and energy objectives are reflected in related policies. In addition, it looks at the extent to which the applicant operates across borders as a channel for engaging civil society in these thematic fields. Finally, it will consider whether the organization has appropriate structures and mechanism in place to represent citizens concerned and really ensure meaningful democratic participation. Next slide, please. Criteria 3 assesses several key dimensions of the proposal in terms of the support that will be brought to EU policy implementation. It looks at how the strategy proposed contributes to better implementation and enforcement of EU legislation at all levels. It also considers the applicant's role as a channel for civil society, including the use of its network to identify implementation barriers and provide policy feedback. In addition, it assesses the quality of communication and dissemination activities to maximize outreach and impact. Finally, it looks how the strategy supports investment in environmental, climate, and energy objectives, including by addressing environmental externalities. Next slide, please. So criterion 4 focuses on the applicant's role as a sensor function in identifying and understanding emerging developments in the fields of environment, climate, and energy transition. It assesses the extent to which the proposal will help to detect new or emerging issues and whether it is able to analyze their root causes as well as their potential impacts. It also looks at the applicant's capacity to propose appropriate solutions and to provide feedback that can contribute to improving and informing EU policy making on these emerging issues. Next slide, please. Finally, criteria 5 is on organizational development, and it assesses the applicant's internal capacity, sustainability, and overall organizational strength. It first looks at the quality of the proposed strategy to address identified organizational development needs and areas for improvement. It also examines the extent to which the organization represents relevant stakeholders and actively works to develop or strengthen its membership or grassroots base. In addition, it assesses the strength of its fundraising strategy and in particular its ability to ensure financial diversification and long-term sustainability. And a further element is the analysis of the organization dependency on the life operating grant. And finally, it also considers the value for money of the proposed work program, ensuring an appropriate balance between resources and results. Next slide, please. So after having looked at the award criteria, we will look at the framework partnership application form and its different parts and suggested recommendations when filling it in. So the framework partnership application is composed of 3 distinctive parts and compulsory annexes. Part A, it's filled in online and it contains administrative information about the applicant as well as a general abstract. Part B, it's a Word template that is downloaded from the portal submission system and it has to be re-uploaded. It contains the technical description of the work program as well as budget estimates for the 2 years of the framework partnership agreement, including estimates of EU funding requested. And part C, it's to be filled in online as well, and it contains some very basic live program indicators. In addition to these 3 parts of the application form, there are a number of compulsory annexes and supporting documents to be submitted. The first one are the statutes of the organization, and then you're requested to provide a list of the members of the executive board or administrative steering body. You're also asked to provide the activity report of the previous year. And last but not least, there is a participant information form for which a template is available in the funding and tenders portal. And when filling in this form, in addition to providing information on the main staff, you're also asked to explain how your organization is active at EU level with the structure and activities covering at least 3 eligible countries. The specific requirement in terms of filling in the participants information form is also spelled out in the call document. Next slide, please. So yeah, looking at each and every one of these parts separately, when filling in, and to give you a few tips, when filling in part A, you're asked to use the organization acronym as the proposal acronym, because we get very creative acronyms, but you're just asked to use the organization's acronym as the proposals acronym, and to use the full name of your organization in the title. In part A, you're also asked to spell out the duration of the framework partnership agreement. It will always be 24 months. And then the abstract that you asked to fill in should provide an overview of the organization. With regards to part B, make sure, as my colleague Eva was saying, to follow all the instructions, including on the formatting, so font size, margin, so on and so forth. That's very important because, as Eva was explaining, we need to have a fair level playing field for all applicants. And do take note of the fact that this part B has a maximum number of pages of 90, and that includes the instructions that cannot be deleted, and that anything in excess of those 90 pages will be blanked out by the system automatically and will not be taken into consideration during the evaluation process. We strongly recommend the use of English when applying. It eases in the evaluation process and allows for a speedier evaluation process. And we also encourage you to avoid using jargon. And if using acronyms, we suggest that you include a glossary as a separate supplementary annex that doesn't need to count as a page of the application form, but that will help us understand the acronyms being used. Next slide, please. So what comes next is really a closer look at each section of Part B of the application form, because it really essentially is the core of the application. And it will also include some practical guidance and tips on what is expected. So section 1 of Part B looks at relevance, and it's articulated around these main elements, which are the organization profile and structure, its mission and objectives, and its contribution to EU policies and priorities under the LIFE program. Under profile, applicants should present their organization, including its structure, membership, governance. And this section should really also explain how the organization engages with members, with grassroots organization and civil society, and how this input feeds into the EU policy processes. Under mission and objectives, applicants should explain the organization mission and overall objectives and clearly demonstrate how these contribute to the EU policy priorities that are covered by the calls for proposals. Under the section on contribution to EU policies, applicants should describe how the proposed work programs support the objective, themes, and priorities of the call and explain the organization added values in this context. Finally, applicants are asked to indicate policy priorities and percentage allocation, but please do note that that's for statistical purposes only and that this information does not influence the evaluation process. Section 2 of Part B focuses on the overall impact of the proposed work program, and applicants are expected to explain the problems and needs that are being addressed and the evidence that are underpinning the proposed action. This section should also clearly describe the expected results and impacts of the organization's activities, both more generally and in relation to the proposed work program. Applicants are asked to identify their target groups and explain how these groups will benefit from the proposed activities. However, do note that those target groups should be described in generic terms rather than by naming specific organizations or individuals. Finally, applicants should demonstrate how they plan to ensure effective outreach and maximize the overall impact of their activities. Next slide, please. Section 3 of Part B focuses on implementation. And this is the section where applicants present the work packages that together make up the biannual work program of the Framework Partnership Agreement. Applicants are first asked to provide a short description of the overall structure of the work program. Please do keep that part concise and straightforward. This is really not the main focus of the assessment, because the main focus of the assessment will be on the work packages themselves. So here again, in that part on the overall structure and the chart, you don't feel that you have to be overly creative. You can just simply list the work packages and that will suffice. And yeah, keep your energy and imagination for the actual description of the work packages themselves. Work package 1 must cover organizational development activities. And then applicants may then duplicate the template of work package 2 in order to create additional work packages. However, the number of work packages should remain proportionate and manageable. And from work package 2 onwards, you should preferably structure them around different policy area. It's not a requirement, but it's a strong suggestion on the basis of the numerous application and work program that we've observed. The ones that are structured around policy areas are usually quite solid. Next slide, please. If we take a bit more time on section 3 on implementation, that's really the core of the application where the work packages are fully detailed. So a bit of jargon here. A work package is a major subdivision of the work program, and activities are in fact grouped into these work packages. And for each work package, applicants are invited to indicate one or several objectives. What I'm telling you now is not spelled out in the slides, but it's actually contained in the instructions that you will find in the template that is downloaded from the Funding and Tenders portal. So for each work package, you're asked to indicate one or several objective. And objectives are rather immediate in nature, meaning that the organization can achieve it within its control and without depending on others. Objectives are normally achieved by the end of the project. The instructions that you receive in the template also ask you to describe the planned activities necessary to achieve these objectives. And we advise you to keep the grouping logical, and tasks should be numbered continuously and clearly linked to the relevant package. So work package 1 would have tasks T11, T12, so on and so forth. And we strongly suggest you to keep that numbering coherent between the framework partnership agreement and the subsequent specific grant agreement proposal. You're also asked to list key expected output and do take note of the fact that the most meaningful outputs that are indicated in the framework partnership agreement may later on be selected as the deliverables under the specific grant agreements proposals that will be presented by EVA. Where relevant, activities and output can be structured per financial year in view of the specific grant agreement application. That's really up to you to decide, but what we've seen is that opting for presenting activities and outputs for each of the financial year in the framework partnership agreement tends to provide for solid proposals. The instruction in the application form also require applicants to distinguish between immediate and medium-term results and impacts. So medium-term results correspond to the outcomes that are achieved during or shortly after the project ends. And they're typically expressed as changes in the target group, such as the uptake or use of project results, while the impacts, on the other hand, occur further in the future, and they're very much influenced by external factors over which the applicant doesn't necessarily have full and direct control. The form also requires qualitative and quantitative indicators as far as possible. You should really focus on a few key indicators, and if these can't be quantified, then you should instead explain how the results will be measured. Each work package description also asks for an inclusion of the channels and means that will be used. The channel refers to the pathways or methods that are used to transmit the information, while the means refer to the specific tools or vehicles that are used to deliver it. These can be presented at work package level as a whole, which is what is most commonly observed, or it can be differentiated by individual activity if that's the preferred option. Finally, and although the instructions in the template refer to financial support to third parties, do note that that's not applicable under the operating grant, and it shouldn't therefore be taken into consideration. At the end of the work package's description, you will see that you need to fill in a timetable. When filling it in, ensure that you use a numbering of months starting with month 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth, and that you do not use calendar month. Next slide, please. And I'm being asked to speed up, so I will try to do so as much as possible. This is a super important slide because section 3 includes a part on communication and dissemination visibility. Given the nature of the activities, communication and disseminations are often already integrated within the individual work packages. Therefore, what is expected here is really mainly an overall strategic overview of the organization's communication approach, including elements such as the team and the resources that will be used, the key messaging and narrative, the partnership or alliance in messaging, and the indicators that will be used to measure communication impact. We invite you to avoid unnecessary repetition of what is already described in the work packages. The instruction in the template also require applicants to describe how the visibility of EU funding will be ensured. And in this context, we draw your attention to the updated visibility requirements that are set out in the call documents. In particular, the European flag, the EU funding statement, the LIFE logo, and where applicable, the Natura 2000 logo must only be displayed on the beneficiary's main website. And the use of these elements on any other material or occasion will be subject to prior approval, written approval by the contracting authority. Finally, there is a mandatory disclaimer that must be included on the beneficiary's website and where approved elsewhere. So when filling in that part of the application form, you will just have to reflect an understanding of what is actually spelled out in the call document with regards to visibility requirements. Next slide, please. So section 4 focuses on the resources that are required to implement the work program, and it's structured around the project management, the budget and the financial management, and finally the risk management. Under the project management section, you're asked to describe how the work program will be managed in practice, and it will include methods and arrangement put in place to ensure effective planning, coordination, monitoring, and quality control of the overall implementation of the work plan activities. Under budget and financial management, the focus is really on the financial governance and cost effectiveness. And that's where you will explain the internal financial decision-making processes of your organization, including how the budget is approved, monitored, and controlled, and how your annual accounts are certified and validated. That's also where you should describe the tools used for financial monitoring, internal control systems, and external audit arrangements, and essentially confirm that the budget respects the principles of sound financial management and value for money. This section also includes a multi-annual budget estimate. It's an estimate providing a rough overview of expected costs and income over the duration of the framework partnership agreement, including what will be requested in terms of EU funding. And finally, there is a section on risk management where applicants are asked to identify key risks, uncertainties, or implementation challenges, and really describe the mitigation measures that will be put in place in order to address those risks. It's an important section that really will demonstrate that your organization has a realistic understanding of potential challenges and a clear strategy to actually manage them. Part B of the framework partnership agreement application forms ends with two declarations that you're asked to confirm, namely that your organization does not benefit from any other EU operating grant for the same period, nor that you will request such an EU operating grant for the same period. And if you're not in a position to confirm these two declarations, you should provide an explanation why. And I will now pass the floor to my colleague Eva for a closer look at the specific grant agreement proposal.
Thank you, Joël. Yes, I will now dive into the SGA call for proposals, award criteria, and then into the application forms. So if I could have, yes, this is the slides presenting the two main points I will address. I will try to go quickly because we want to allow time for questions and answers after the presentation. So next slide, please. So these are the award criteria of the SGA call that you can find in the call text in funding and tender portal. There are only three award criteria. First one is relevance, which means relevance of the SGA proposal to the FPA proposal. The quality of the proposal, and then the third criterion is on resources. Now, the three criteria have a maximum score of 20 points. So for a total maximum of 60 points, there is no minimum pass score per criterion, but there is a minimum pass score overall, which is 35 points minimum. Now, it's important to keep in mind that we will not have a new ranking for the SGA. proposals. We will use the same ranking as for the FPA, unless, of course, proposal fails, in which case we will have to look at the reserve list. Well, please also note that only FPA partners are eligible for an SGA, meaning that only those that have signed a framework partnership agreement will be assessed for a specific grant agreement. Also, I would like to note here that there is no weighting in the scores, unlike the FPA award evaluation. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide, please. So this SGA, as was mentioned already, it is 1 year specific grant agreements that will start on the first day of the beneficiary's financial year, which is next year, 2027. The duration that you will indicate must be 12 months, no more, no less. And we will focus here on the work program for financial year 2027. So it will really have to correspond to the activities that you have described in the FPA proposal for the first year of the FPA. Once again, the budget, this will be more detailed in the SGA proposal, and it will be only based on the staff costs. You will add 50% of the staff cost that constitutes the flat rate, and the total, that is staff cost plus 50%, will be what we call eligible costs that will be used as a basis for the SGA contribution. Next slide, please. Now let's have a look at the SGA application forms that you can find in the electronic submission system of the Funding and Tenders portal. First of all, like in the FPA submission system, you will find similar forms. First, application form part A, which contains administrative information about the applicants, and the summarized budget for the work plan that you will fill in directly online. The application form part B, that contains the technical description of the work plan, also divided by work packages. This you will have to download from the portal submission system, complete it on your computer, and then re-upload it in the submission system. And part C, which is filled in directly online, like part A, which contains basic life program indicators specific for operating grants. There is a mandatory annex, which is the detailed budget table, as we mentioned before, which also, like part B, it is downloaded from the portal and must be completed and then uploaded again. Next slide, please. Now, well, I don't want to repeat myself. Part A is filled in online. Like for the FPA, as Joël just mentioned before, the acronym of the proposal must be the same as the acronym of your organization, and the name of the proposal, the name of the organization. The abstracts, like in the FPA, should provide an overview of the organization and its activities. You have to mention here in part A the 9 digits reference of the FPA proposal that you will get once you submit the FPA proposal. There is also in part A this summarized budget table, as I mentioned already. This will be detailed. You will get more details about this in the financial presentation that will follow. For part B of the application form part B is downloaded and will be filled in and then uploaded as a PDF. It's important to note that there is a box, a gray box which is called important notice, which should be deleted before you upload. The maximum number of pages is 45 pages. You can use any EU language, but you're advised to use English for ease of use during the evaluation. And as Joël said before, we would advise you to use a clear, understandable language to avoid a jargon. And if you have a lot of acronyms, either spell them out or add as an annex a glossary so that we can follow easily during the evaluation. Next slide, please. Now, more in detail, part B will start with the section called relevance, which where you have to explain what is the contribution of the SGA proposal to the FPA, and explain how the SGA activities will contribute to the objectives of the FPA action plan. Then second section, implementation, includes two subsections. One is work plan, which is a list of your work packages, or a graphic presentation. Can be very simple. You don't have to go into very detailed activities here. While in the second section, you go actually into the activities with the work packages. Work package 1, organizational development, and the following. You have to ensure consistency between the SGA work program and the FPA work program, and in this case, focus on the first year of implementation. Each work package has to be labeled from month 1 to month 12, depending on which months it covers. You have to limit the number of deliverables which are requested here to a maximum of 10-15 deliverables, no more than 15. All deliverables are due by the end of the implementation period. So it can be before, but at the latest month 12. It's another important thing about deliverables, the dissemination level. This means that each deliverable will have a dissemination level that you have to set up. There are different types of dissemination levels, which you will see that the ones that we would advise you to use are either PU, which means public, or SEN, which means sensitive. So if a deliverable contains sensitive information, please label it as SEN so that it will not be published. While if it can be published in the, it will be published in the funding and tender portal project results at the end of the reporting period, meaning once it is approved by CINEA, only if it is labeled PU. Please note that there are no milestones for NGO operating grants, so you can leave that section empty. There is also a section 2.3, which is not mentioned here, but it's a communication, dissemination, and visibility, like for the FPA proposal, but only for the first year. Part B also includes section on resources. First of all, 3.1 on project management, which is a free text that gives an overall description of the implementation of the work program through different tools, measures, and procedures. The part 3.2, which is shown in this slide, budget and financial management, it's actually only a very simplified budget with personnel cost, flat rate, and the total eligible cost, and the requested EU funding. Here you have to ensure coherence of this simplified budget with the detailed budget table, that is the annex. And then, like in the FPA proposal, you have a section on risk management, where you have to explain what are the risks that you identify for the upcoming year of the SGA, and how you propose to mitigate those risks. Next slide, please. So I would like to draw your attention to the Commission guidance on policy-related activities, which is a public document that you can find online, or clicking on this link, you will get all the slides on the website where you register for this event. So you will be able also to click on all the links on the slides. This guidance aims at avoiding that proposals include overly prescriptive elements on policy or policy objectives, and specifically detailed advocacy activities that are directed at EU institutions and their representatives. In fact, advocacy activities are still, of course, eligible. They're part of the normal work of NGOs we fund with operating grants. But we want to ensure that the positions that are, well, that the contribution of NGOs that are our beneficiaries to policy discussions is not framed or mandated as an expected result of EU funding, and that activities are framed as information sharing, knowledge transfer, contribution to policy processes, and not as an obligation of the specific grant agreement. It's also important to note that beneficiaries remain fully and solely responsible for their own opinions, views, and actions that are carried out through the work program. And in case there are still elements that are not aligned with the guidance, please note that we might ask you to remove them during the grant agreement preparation phase. Now, I think that the next slide is it's a timetable. Thank you. So just as a reminder, there are two different deadlines. The 8th of September for the Framework Partnership Agreement submission, and the 22nd of September for the submission of the specific grant agreement proposal. The evaluation of proposals will run between September and December. Then we will inform applicants about the evaluation results in January next year. And we aim at signing, preparing the FPA and SGA grant agreements between January and March next year. And we aim at signing all the grant agreements by April next year. So just as a reminder, remember that proposals must be submitted electronically via the Funding and Tender Portal electronic system submission system, and by using the forms that are provided in the electronic submission system. Then the next step for the framework partners that will sign the Framework Partnership Agreement early next year is that we will send an invitation only to those partners for the submission of a specific grant agreement that will cover the following year, that is financial year 2028 of the organization. Next slide, please. Okay, here you have the links to the Funding and Tender Portal, where you can find the calls, to CINEA website, where you can have more information about calls for proposals, and also about the beneficiaries of the past calls for proposals. If you have questions, now we will soon open the question and answer session. However, if your question is not answered, or if you have very specific questions, please don't ask them now, but send them to our functional mailbox, which is cinea-life-ngo@ec.europa.eu. And we will try to reply as soon as possible, and in any case, within 5 working days. Now, we open the questions through Slido. You have here the QR code. Please connect through Slido and send us your questions. Now, we will focus only on this, the questions related to what we just presented, the calls, and then after the question and answer session on the technical part of the 2 calls, we will have a presentation on the financial aspects of the calls, And then you will be able also to ask more specific financial questions to my colleague, Anne Vermalen. Please, can we see the Slido? I don't know, I suppose we have questions already. And I would like to invite our panelists to join us. Well, there is, of course, Joël Marfalis. I see the questions are coming. Good. Then we have also our colleagues, the Deputy Head of Unit, Leo Meyer, who introduced the session this morning. And well, for Unit D2 Life Environments, and the the Deputy Head of Unit, sorry, for the Unit D1 in CINEA, Mathilde Louvet. Can you please join us to complete the panel? Okay, let's start with the first question. I would like just to remind our participants that when you see the questions that are already on Slido, you can like them. And when you like them, they have more chances to go up because the most popular questions will be the first to be treated. So they will have more chances to be treated today. So first question, do you have more details on relevant policy priorities to be taken into account? In the last FPA, there were specific sections on this. Maybe who can answer this question, Joël?
I'll take it, Eva. Yeah, so the areas for policy priorities are spelled out in the core documents, and they're essentially all the priorities covered by the LIFE program. So it would be a bit time consuming to actually highlight them all, but it really depends on the field of intervention of your organizations. So I would strongly suggest that you thoroughly read the core documents that give a very good overview of all the priorities of the LIFE program, and to also very closely look at the general priorities of the Commission when it comes to the fields of intervention, which are environmental protection, climate action, and clean energy transition. More than that would be a bit too time consuming for us to take you through for the moment. But just to emphasize the fact that there is no favored emphasis in the evaluation process. So we do not provide, we do not give greater priority to one field over another. And that's very important for you to bear in mind. Maybe Eva, maybe the ones that are projecting the questions should maybe keep the questions online. It would be easier for us to
Yes,
follow
in
them
fact,
through,
can you
and
show
it
the
would make things
questions?
a bit faster because we're
Thanks.
running a bit out of
There
time.
they are.
But Eva, maybe I can read them, and if I need to call on another panelist, I will do
Okay,
so.
as you wish. Yes, go
Yeah,
on.
it will be a bit faster. What would you
Yes, of
say are
course.
the most important changes in this new call for proposal compared to the previous framework partnership agreement, NGO specific grant agreement calls? So you will maybe recall that the last framework partnership agreement call was launched in 2024, and it covered the financial year 2025 and 26 of the organizations. I would say that generally speaking, the calls are very similar, but there are two main differences. In 2024, the framework partnership agreement was launched before the publication of the guidance of the European Commission on in participation to the development and implementation of EU legislation, the guidance that Eva briefly referred to in her presentation, and that was not part of the cold document. It was implemented during the preparation of the framework partnership agreement with the beneficiaries of those FPAs, but it was not actually mentioned in the cold document. So that's a big difference. It's a reference to the implementation of the guidance of the European policy on an EU policy implementation. Now, the other main difference is really the EU visibility requirements, which I have explained in my presentation. EU visibility requirements in this framework partnership agreement call and the specific grant agreement call are very different from what they were in the past. They are a derogation to the articles of the model grant agreement. We no longer request the logos and the disclaimers to be posted on every communication product, so on and so forth, of the beneficiary organizations. the requirement is limited to using these logos on the website along with the disclaimer, and their use on other supports is subject to prior approval. So these are really the two main difference, I would say, in addition to the fact that obviously policy priorities have evolved slightly since 2024. So I would, but that's really your field of expertise. So in theory, you know what the policy priorities are today in relation to what they were in 2024. On the life logo, could you please confirm that the life logo must only be on the beneficiary's website? As I just said, that's indeed the case, and not on deliverables or other materials beneficiaries use. Yes, it should be limited to the beneficiary's website, and its use on other supports is subject to our prior approval. Next question. If we associate with other NGOs from the EU, how formal would the cooperation need to be eligible to receive funding? Do we need to have already established a legal entity, or can we apply with a commitment to do so? So to be eligible, the applicant must demonstrate a legally constituted network. It either has to be as a registered entity, so an association or a federation, or a structured membership-based organization that is governed by formal statutes or founding documents. So any promises to do so, any memorandum of understanding, any partnership agreement may evidence cooperation, but they do not establish a required permanent legally binding framework. And without such a framework or such a legally binding structure, the applicant would not satisfy the eligibility criteria for the grant. If funding starts from April 2027, should the framework partnership agreement work plan start from January 27, would staff costs be eligible with hint date? So this very much depend on when your financial year starts. Most organizations, I would say, have a financial year that starts on the 1st of January each year, but some of them have a starting date that is not the 1st of January. So the month one would really be the first day of the first month of your financial year. And indeed, because the call has an evaluation timeline and a grant agreement preparation timeline, that sometimes over exceeds the start date of the financial year of an organization. So we will be signing contracts sometime between, let's say, February 27 and April 27. It will indeed mean that we will have covered costs that will have started before the signature of the contract. But that's what happens nearly each year. So we do sign contract after the start date of implementation. What are the criteria for being an applicant active at EU level? So, I mean, as this was partially covered during the presentation, this criteria of active at EU level is met by having structure and activities covering at least 3 EU member states or associated countries. So applicants have to demonstrate a structure and activities that generally cover at least 3 EU member states or countries associated to the LIFE program. Having an office in one of those 3 countries will not be sufficient. And to this end, partners and members must be formally established as a legal entity. You're basically really required to describe how your structure and activities cover these 3 countries. So basically what I mean to say here is that a presence at EU level is not a requirement. However, genuine activities being implemented in 3 EU countries is a requirement. Having an office in Brussels is not a requirement to to summarize it. If a project staff member is planned to be recruited but has not yet been identified at the time of submission, would it be sufficient to describe the expected profile? Yes, indeed it would. So you would have to identify the profile and then the number of working months that that person would deploy, and that would be specifically mentioned in the detailed budget table of the specific grant agreement. Is the funding always for the amount requested in the application, and can the EC decide to grant a lesser amount, or is there no in between the requested amount or no funding at all? So, I mean, obviously there is an element of value for money in the evaluation process. And if we feel that the costs have been overestimated or some that costs that have been budgeted are not eligible, then it could be that we would, in the grant agreement preparation process, revise such costs that could potentially lead to a recommendation for a lesser amount of the EU requested funding. but that would happen at the moment of the grant agreement preparation. So, I mean, the question is not a black and white answer. A revision can happen and is based on the eligibility of costs essentially. I don't know how we're doing on time, but
Yes, actually, we are just over time now. So
okay. So
I don't know if we can take another couple of minutes to answer two more
I
questions.
mean, let's run the question and answers until 10:50, and
Yes.
we will then move on. And just for everyone's understanding, we will keep the questions on archive, and we will go through them and update the frequently asked questions with the questions that you have raised in order to make sure that people do not remain with unanswered questions. And if you feel that your question was not answered and you still want it to be addressed, then feel free to send it to our functional mailbox, and we will treat it as soon as possible. So yeah, a couple more minutes. In relation to the new visibility rules, will you provide more detailed guidelines to know when exactly you expect us to ask for your approval of the use of the logo? So the instructions are fairly clear. If you use it on something else than your website, then there is a need for our prior approval. So possibly further instruction will be sent possibly to beneficiaries of the framework partnership agreement and specific grant agreement, but the rule is fairly straightforward. It has to be on your website, but any other use is subject to prior approval. Is the funding always for the amount requested in the application? I think I've covered that already.
Yes.
Do we have to, oops, it jumped. Can an FPA grant be one but not the SGA? It's pretty uncommon, especially when we run the calls in parallel as we are doing it in 2026. So we have the former partnership agreement call and the specific grant agreement call. And usually, to be completely honest, the specific grant agreement call is 80% copy paste of the former partnership agreement call because you're preparing them at the same time. There are a couple of elements that are different, but the vast majority of the information is very similar. So if you win the FPA, then you're very likely that your SGA will pass. This said, it could be in subsequent years, so 2027 in this case, that the person who drafts the specific grant agreement proposal has absolutely no knowledge of how a proposal should be written. There was staff change, the information got lost, and the quality of the specific grant agreement proposal is such that it doesn't pass the threshold. And that would essentially mean that you have a firm partnership agreement signed, but that the quality of your specific grant agreement is such that it cannot enter the ranking at the position at which the FPA proposal had entered the ranking. It has never happened. So I would honestly doubt that would be the case. What can happen, however, and that has been the case, sorry, I will just quickly finish on this, is that we establish a reserve list for framework partnership agreement. So we will sign a certain number of framework partnership agreement, and we will establish a reserve list. The reserve list is essentially due to the fact that we don't have, I mean, there is a limit to the funding availability on our side. So it could be that you have a framework partnership agreement signed and in order to cover the 2 years, but that you cannot sign a specific grant agreement because we don't have the money this year to sign it this year. It could be that more funding is available the following year. That is the only situation that might arise. Do we have to include non-eligible activities that our organization carries or in the application? No, you don't. You only include in it eligible activities, so activities that contribute towards the implementation of the aims of the LIFE program. Anything else that your organization is involved in that has nothing to do with the environment, climate, energy transition shouldn't be included in your work program. Um, okay. Is there under this FPA more emphasis on project implementation, even if evaluation criteria do not differentiate with policy development? So the call text does indicate that EU priorities are focusing on implementation, and that's a reality of the policy context that we're in today. However, as the person who raised this question rightly indicates, the weighing of the score doesn't differentiate between implementation and development. So it will not have an impact on the evaluation. However, if your proposal only focuses on development of EU policy and has no elements of implementation, clearly the scoring on the implementation will be fairly low. So do bear that balance in mind. I'm quickly looking at the time. I will take those last 3 questions and then we will stop. How detailed will the description of the organization and its activities for EU policy development be? I'm from a big EU NGO and the description would be vast. Well, I'm afraid then my answer will not really satisfy you, but you're basically limited by the page number. So it's really up to you to choose what is the information that that you want to put forth. Um, is the funding always for the amount? No, no, no. What happens if due to a policy change, some tasks envisioned at proposal stage is cancelled? I mean, there is an understanding, there is obviously an understanding for that between the proposal stage and the grant agreement preparation stage. And there is also an understanding for that during the implementation of a grant agreement. If the policy context changes, it's obviously taken into consideration during the configuration. If an activity needs to be removed, it's something that we can discuss with a beneficiary preparing the grant agreement. And similarly, during the course of the implementation of a grant agreement, if the policy framework changes in such a way that it has a strong impact on the work program of the organization, at the moment of reporting, that this has to be explained and justified, but it can be fully understood and accepted. Yes, I think that unfortunately that will be it for today because we need to leave the floor to our financial colleagues. But as I said, I mean, don't feel frustrated if your question was not answered. We will for sure go through them and make our uttermost to answer them rapidly via an updated version of the frequently asked questions on our website. And do feel free to address them to us in our functional through our functional mailbox.
Thank you, Joël. Thank you for answering so many questions. Well, we know that there are more questions that were not answered, but as you rightly point out, there is the functional mailbox and the frequently asked questions on CINEA website that can be always consulted. Now, we are running late, unfortunately, so let's move on to the next presentation. I would like to give the floor to Anne Vermalen, our Head of Sector Finance in CINEA. Anne, please take the floor and start your presentation on the financial aspects of the calls for proposals, FPA and SGA. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Eva. Can I have the presentation, please? So in the meantime, welcome to everybody. I'm Anne Vermalen. I'm heading the live financial team. Together with Lorenzina Bruno, we will deliver this presentation and we will answer your questions. Lorenzina, she's normally heading the team that is dealing with the NGO grants. Okay, next slide, please. First of all, some reference material. Especially for newcomers, it's very useful to look into the grant agreement, the framework partnership agreement and the SGA, this specific grant agreement, so that you know what you're signing up for in case you win the grant. The call documents and the application forms are also stored under the link mentioned in this slide. You also, in case you have not yet registered your legal entity and you want to participate, then you will find the necessary guidance under the link, the second one that you see here, also with the LEAR appointment and the financial capacity assessment, as you will need some documents for that. A very important document is the annotated grant agreement, which takes over the conditions or the articles of the grant agreement, but it also gives you details on these articles, and it gives sometimes also examples, like for example on the calculation of your personal costs. So very important to take a look at the sections that are dealing with eligible costs. Next slide, please. For establishing your budget, there are, of course, two different parts to it. First, for the framework partnership agreement, you have the part B that needs to be filled in, where you have the costs as well as the income part. they will not match the totals because under the income part, you will not have your own funding. So it's normal that they are not in balance. Under the cost part, you will need for the 2 years of this FPA, so Framework Partnership Agreement call, you will need to specify the personal costs, and then you will apply on that 50%, and that is what you will enter in the second column for the flat rate. Then for the income side, you will have to put membership fees and other contributions related to subscriptions and so on. Then you have also third-party funding that will come in the second column of the income, and the income generated by the activities. That will then form the total of your income for the action, and then you will have to define the requested grant amount. This can be calculated if you would deduct from the costs your income that you have just calculated there, and then you add also your own funding to this income, and the difference between that can be your EU funding. Next slide, please. For the specific grant agreement, you will need to provide a bit more detailed information. First part is A, that is the summarized budget table that you will need to fill online. So you will see that the columns with the arrows in blue on the top, that they need to be in balance. So you need to make sure that you don't forget to fill especially some parts in the income side. So in the cost side, you will need to include for the specific year of the SGA call, where under which you will apply, you need to include your personal costs and then calculate again 50% on that. I think it might be that this comes automatically, but if not, make sure that you enter 50% of the direct staff cost, personal costs from the first column. At the income side, you will, of course, need to request the EU funding that you would like to have to finance the previous costs. And then you will also need to specify which other income that you will have for this grant. So this will be your own contribution, which don't forget to enter it because it often ensures an imbalance between the total cost and the total income, but also potentially income from your action, from the activities, and then from third parties. Next slide, please. And then you have the part B, the estimated budget for the resources. This information that you need to fill there can be retrieved from the other tables that you have completed. So the requested grant amount can maximum be 70% of the total eligible cost. Next slide, please. Then we have one annex that needs to be added that can be downloaded, as Eva already explained. It's the detailed budget table in which you need to specify for each function the monthly rates that you can calculate them by the total yearly salary cost divided by 12. This is a simplified calculation method that can only be used for defining your budget. You will then also have to enter the person months for each of the work packages this specific function will work on the grant. And then automatically the rest of the calculations will happen at the last part of the table. Just to mention that if you have somebody working 50%, that the work package, the information that you will need to fill there is, for example, somebody working full time for the grant, but only at 50% can maximum have a total of 6 person months over the entire year. So it's then taking into account the percentage of employment. It can be, of course, less depending on the type of contract that the person has. Make sure that between the different budget tables, that the amounts align. So the same amounts, like for the detailed budget table, it's best that you set this up first, because the information that you calculate there will then go into the other tables. You need to make sure that all the same amounts in the different tables are aligned, so that there are no inconsistencies. Next slide, please. Okay, to establish your budget, Article 6 of the grant agreement that handles the eligibility of the costs is important. So you should have a read of that. You can only enter amounts in euro. And as already mentioned in the previous presentation, you can only have one operating grant per financial year. Also note that there are action grants that the EU gives, which are for specific projects, which is not the same as an operating grant, which finances your operating costs. Both can run in parallel, but you cannot have the same costs financed twice by the operating grant and by the action grant. You can only have one operating grant per year. Under no circumstances shall the same cost be financed twice, because we cannot have double funding. The earliest start date of the expenditure can be the 1st of January 2027, but of course it depends on your budgetary year when it starts. Like already mentioned in the previous presentation, some NGOs start their years only in April or in July. It will depend on your specific case. Next slide, please. Okay, what are the eligibility criteria? So the cost, and then I'm speaking here about the personal cost because it's the only category of cost, of direct cost that is allowed for this grant. They should be actually incurred during the duration of the project. Of course, for the reporting, which takes place after the year of your grant is finished, this, of course, this cost can also be added, and it is normally for the 2 months that follow the end of your grant. So they can also be included. They should belong to budget categories of the call, which is in this case only the personal cost category, and then you have also for the indirect cost a flat rate. They should be directly related to the action, and they should be necessary for the implementation. They also need to be identifiable, verifiable in the accounts of the beneficiary. And then, of course, compliant with the national laws on taxes, or labor and social security. All costs should be reasonable, justified, and they must comply with the principle of sound financial management. And as already mentioned, on the direct personal costs, you will have then the 50% flat rate to cover all the remaining costs that you would incur with regard to the action. Next slide, please. Well, how is the EU funding calculated or determined? So first, the system itself will already calculate your theoretical maximum amount of EU funding. So it is based on the 70% funding rate. This is the maximum that you can ask. Of course, there is this limitation also for the 700,000 euro that come on top of that. Then the beneficiary or the applicant will have to enter manually the EU funding that it will request. So maximum 700,000, but of course, it can be lower than the theoretical maximum that has been calculated by the tool. This will depend on what you will get from other co-financers, potential income from your own project, or your own funding that you want to add to cover the cost. As already mentioned also while answering the questions previously, the maximum grant amount is the one that is decided by the EU, but normally it corresponds to the amount of funding that you will request. except, for example, if you would ask more than 700,000 or if we find a lot of ineligible costs. Then usually the first pre-financing will be the 60% of this EU grant that we will provide you with. The final payment will then be maximum 40% if you justify sufficient costs. Of course, depending on the financial capacity assessment, it might be that we will not pay out the first pre-financing at 60%. It might also be that we will request other guarantees in case your situation is if you're a weak applicant. But this will be dealt with during the grant agreement preparation phase. Next slide, please. Then, if we go into the personal cost section, there are 3 types of personal costs that can be eligible under this grant. We don't finance all your personal costs, so you need to make sure that they comply with the different categories. Otherwise, they will be covered by the indirect costs. The first cost category is the one for employees. What type of costs are included there? So all the salary costs, including social security contributions, taxes and other costs linked to the remuneration, if they arise from the national law or the employment contract, or but I don't think it's applicable for NGOs, the equivalent appointing act, that's more for public entities. Then for the A2 cost category on natural persons, these are the costs linked to persons that work under a direct contract with you, other than an employment contract. So this means direct contract, not a contract that goes through another company. So no interim staff or other type of staff that is recruited through other agencies or whatever. Only costs that are linked to persons working directly for you with a direct contract. Then the A3 cost category is the one for seconded persons. So in case persons are seconded from another organization, and only if they are seconded against the payment. Otherwise, it's in-kind contribution, which we don't take into account, neither for the cost side, neither for the income side. Those 2 cost categories, A2, A3, they have some conditions. Especially that the persons that are hired through this, they work under conditions that are similar to those of an employee. And this is mainly related to the way of the work is organized, how the tasks need to be performed, the premises where they need to be performed, and also their teleworking conditions. So be careful if you have a seconded person or a natural person working for you and they work in other countries or in other offices that are not the one from the entity that is in our grant, they need to respect the same conditions on teleworking as your own employees. This means if your own employees need to come to the office 2 days, 3 days per week, the same counts for these natural persons or the seconded persons, and they need to come to your office. So the same conditions. So check your rules with regard to that before you put the budget together. Then the result of the work belongs to the beneficiary. So unless otherwise agreed, but I think that is pretty straightforward. So next slide, please. Then how will we establish the cost, or how can you calculate the cost for your budget? Well, for employees at budget level, it is very easy. You can just take the total yearly salary cost of the employee and you divide it by 12, and then you multiply it with the person months that the person would work on this grant. Note that it is different from the calculation at final reporting stage and the cost that you can actually declare, because there, for this type of category, the costs will be calculated based on a daily rate, which is established dividing your total yearly salary cost for that employee by 215 days. And then it is also maximum 215 days that can be declared during the year for this person. But this comes at implementation level, but it might be good to know this already now. Then for the A2 and A3 cost categories, it will depend, of course, what is specified in the agreements that are put in place in the mostly it's like a consultancy agreement or a secondment agreement. So if persons are there compensated in hourly rates or in daily rates, you can just take that and multiply it with the time that is foreseen for this person to work under the grant. But in case they are paid on a yearly basis or a monthly basis, well, monthly basis, then you will need to do the calculations in the same way as it is done for the employees. In case you have, for example, an hourly rate specified in the contract, then you will need to check Article 20.6 of the annotated grant agreement, because you will need to convert the hourly rate to a daily rate. And there are three methods, but you will need to check what is applicable for your organization. Then to convert to monthly costs, especially when we use the 215 days to calculate the daily rate, then you can count that 17.92 working days are a month, so 215 divided by 12 days. Otherwise, it depends a bit on what is specified in this contract that you signed with the natural and the seconded persons. Then the rates must not be significantly different from personnel performing similar tasks under an employment contract with the beneficiary. And also natural seconded persons not complying with the specific conditions for this category are deemed to be covered by the flat rate. So it's really very important that you check the annotated grant agreement to see if they comply. Next slide, please. Ineligible costs. Cost not complying with the definition of an eligible cost. Excessive expenditure, deductible or refundable VAT, which you will need to check if you can recover VAT, and in-kind contributions. Costs or contributions declared under other grants, especially when you're already financed by other EU grants, can also not be included. Next slide, please. Then just some lessons learned, and I just also want to point out that you can already start asking questions in case you have not yet done so. Lessons learned from grant agreement preparation phase. I know that for now this might not be very important, but it might help to ensure a good quality of your proposal. And for the subsequent phase as well, if you get selected for funding. So make sure that the amounts that you report in the different tables of your proposal for the budget, that they are consistent. There are substantial increases in personal costs from time to time versus previous years for existing grants for NGOs that have already a grant. And in those cases, we will ask them to be justified during the gap phase. The budget should be in balance. So expenditure and income at SGA level should be balanced. So often participants or applicants in this case, they forget to include their own contribution. Next slide, please. Then I also would like to include here some points for attention at the implementation stage. This means after you have signed the grant, because there are also always some issues related to that. So for the establishment of the daily rate for the calculation of your costs, we will use the annual salary cost of the person, that is an employee, divided by 215 days. The number of day equivalents, therefore, that can be declared per year cannot be higher than 215 days, because otherwise you would declare more cost than the actual annual salary cost of the person. We are then talking also about working time factors. For example, a full-time person has a working time factor of 1 if they work 100%, and then for somebody, for example, working 50%, you have 0.5. We can also recommend you to use the personal cost calculation tool that we have developed. There is a link in the slide. You will find it also on our website, and it's very useful so that you have an idea how these calculations are done. You can only include eligible salary components. Of course, also when you establish the budget, you should look at that. And then note that even staff working full time, there is a mandatory time registration. You can do this with timesheets in your own system if they comply with the rules, with everything that we need to know. So check there for also the annotated grant agreement. And we would recommend that you use the time declaration template that is in the portal. Of course, this is not mandatory. You will also see that you will only need to declare the time spent on this operating grant, so no longer all the time that the person worked for you in the organization. Next slide, please. Okay, here's some general information in case you want to keep in touch with us, social media links and so on. Next slide, please. The link to our live website. There is also the link to the funding and tender portal. And then you have also the email address where you can send questions that cannot be answered during this question and answer session that will follow. So because we will only be able to handle a certain number, and also if they are very specific for your case, then it's better to ask them through an email. Next slide, please. Okay, so this concludes the presentation. Then let's see.
Thank you, Anne.
Questions.
Great. Yes, now I will open the question and answer session for the financial part of your presentation on the calls for proposals for framework partnership agreements and specific grant agreements on operating grants. And I see that Lorenzina has already joined us. So our participants can join by using the QR code they see on the screen. I see that it was already displayed before, so I'm sure that we have already some questions for you. I don't know if you prefer that I read the questions or you want to go through them. Maybe that would be quicker as we did with the
Yes, I can read them. So if the questions are shown on the screen.
Yes, please. Can you display the questions, technical team? There they are.
Okay, so let's start then. Can personal costs of employees seconded from a 100% owned subsidiary BV to the applicant NGO be declared as eligible costs under personal cost category A3, given that the costs are recharged at cost with no markup and are fully documented? Well, if you have secondment in place and you fulfill all the specific conditions and you have to pay for the costs of the staff, then of course you can declare them. Many NGOs are partners in ongoing LIFE projects. How can we confirm not to benefit from other LIFE grants? So as I mentioned in my presentation already, you need to make a distinction between operating grants and action grants. You can only have one operating grant per year, but it might be that you can have also action grants that are ongoing for specific projects. That is allowed. The only thing you will need to pay attention to is that in these EU LIFE grants, in the action grants, it's not always sure that you can charge the overheads or the indirect costs, because this depends how your accounting is set up and if all these costs can be actually split. So for that, you will need to double check. But this is normally for an operating grant, not the issue. It's mostly for the action grants in that case. For A1 estimated cost, should the calculation include only the staff assigned to the project, or should it be assessed at organizational level, including all employees? So I would say that if you know already the staff that will be working, then use because the budget will be more appropriate if you use the salaries for these persons. Of course, if you still need to recruit staff, then you can use the salary that you estimate to provide to this type of posts. The maximum of 700,000 funding per year is meant per beneficiary. Well, these are mono beneficiary grants. You only have one beneficiary. So it is the maximum of the grant. So for this particular beneficiary. What is the rationale of having the budget template and reporting one asking for monthly rate while the calculation method is based on day rates? Well, here, for example, for the budget, it's just much easier to do an estimation like that. So it is a simplified way of doing this. Therefore, we don't want you to do the very detailed calculations with regard to day rates, because also the day rate, it will depend also on the actual cost. It is a simplified way, but nothing we told you. If you want a yearly salary, you want to do the real calculations, you can also do the real calculations and then convert them to monthly costs. Because for the table, this is the way, unfortunately, that it is set up for budgetary purposes. Does it matter where our co-funding is coming from or being directed to? For example, money coming from outside the EU or for projects outside the EU? If yes, what about projects with activities both inside and outside the EU? No, the co-funding is the funding that you receive from other sources and that will be used to finance this grant. So you can use any funding that you get for that specifically, but you cannot include EU funding that you get in the frame of other grants. Could employees employed in another country through an employer of record company be considered eligible under personal costs? As I mentioned, if you go through another organization to recruit staff, then it might not necessarily be eligible under this category, and it might fall under categories that are in this case covered by the indirect costs, so the flat rate. So you need to see how this is set up. Only direct contracts are considered. For natural persons via direct contracts, are the invoices with days worked sufficient to justify the day equivalence? The AGA mentions time declaration. Yes. No, time declaration, you will always need a time declaration also for the natural persons, because they need to work in accordance with the same conditions as other staff. So they will also need to fill the timesheets. Should documents such as NGOs, financial statements, and activity reports preferably be translated into English? So in principle, I think, Eva, maybe you can also have a look at that, because I think that this might be for the evaluation stage. But I would say translation is not necessarily.
That's correct. And translation is not necessary, but is strongly suggested.
Okay. Yeah, I think with AI tools that it might not be so.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a certified translation, obviously, and all languages of the EU can be accepted, but translation in English, even if not certified, are appreciated.
If my fiscal year starts on the 1st of July, should I start activities in 2026 or 27? It will be 27. Okay, so this concludes the question and answer session. Natural person will have to fill in timesheets. Is this changed from the previous life operating grant? No. This has always been the case. This has always been the case because natural persons need to fulfill the same, need to work in accordance with the same conditions as employees. So there is always timesheets required for justifying the time. Also for staff working full time.
Thank you, Anne. It seems that you managed to answer all the questions, so well done. And for now, there seems to be no more questions. So I think that we can invite our colleagues to open their cameras. And I would just like to mention before we say goodbye that all the slides of these presentations that you have just seen will be published on the website of the EU Life Info Days. And you can also find them through the CINEA website. So in case you missed something or in case you want to look at the slides again of the presentations, please keep in mind that as of next week, we will have them all published on the website of this event, on this platform. And not only the slides, but also all the recordings will be published. So you can also look again at all the presentations. And then just keep in mind that you can send us your questions through the functional the functional mailbox that is CINEA dash live. That is CINEA live NGO at ec.europa.eu. That's it. And please have a look at the FAQs that are published also on CINEA website in case you want to see questions that you might have in mind that are already answered there. These are the panelists of this session. Thank you for joining again. So thank you all for this session that I hope was clear and instructive for all our participants. And yes, I wish all our applicants a lot of luck for their proposal and for the submission of their proposal in the funding and tenders portal. So for now, I think we can conclude. Thanks again for your attention. And yeah, let's keep in touch. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.